So this is the Get Noticed podcast, and I am Jamar Noel of Launcharts Media, and today I am joined by the one and only Erica Merritt of Equius Group. Erica, how are you today?
I am well.
That's
How about
great.
yourself?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
You know, it's the end of the week while we're recording this, and
It's Friday.
right, exactly. So Friday always kind of brings about a certain feel, and I like it. So.
I like it too.
So glad to have you finally come and have this chat with me. I think that a conversation with Erica Merritt is a conversation worth having. Erica, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and then tell us a little bit about Equius Group?
Sure. So I am so many things. I'm first and foremost, I am here because I am founder and principal consultant with Equius Group, but I am also a wife and a mother and a good friend and a lover of science fiction and someone who is deeply committed to social justice.
Okay. So, social justice being the most profound part of that introduction, being a mother and a wife, being the most honorable, but being a lover of science fiction is the most standout. So,
Yes.
so let's go into that. Lover of science fiction. What's the apex of science fiction fandom for you?
So, Octavia Butler,
Okay.
pretty much anything. Octavia Butler, anything that she has written. I have, like many people, as some of her books are being turned into film and to shows. Most recently, there's the Kindred series on Hulu, which is based on her book Kindred. And probably my favorite is still Parable of the Sower. That is probably my favorite. But I also really love Fledgling, which is a little bit of a different bend for her. It was about vampires, which is not something that she usually wrote about. Right now, I am listening to Rebecca Roan Horse's book, Fever Star. Fever Star. Yes. I just finished Black Sun and I just started this one. So I'm still at the beginning.
More of an audiobook connoisseur these days?
This one is an audiobook. I tend to read a book and also be listening to books at the same time.
Okay.
So
That's something. I don't know if many people can manage that. Because they might become used to a narrator or hearing that narrator's voice or whoever reads it, and then to kind of jump back in and read it themselves. I don't know. I mean, that's peculiar, I would say.
So the way that I started listening to audiobooks actually was because of travel. Mm-hmm. So I actually have serious motion sickness.
Okay.
And I cannot even read a book while I'm riding in a car or even a plane. Okay. I'll get nauseous. And so and I want to do something while I'm sitting on the plane for hours. And so I started to listen to audiobooks that way. And I have found that I really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And especially when the author is reading the book. And I also have a favorite narrator.
So who's your favorite narrator?
Bonnie Turpin is my favorite.
I gotta put a sound. Does she do a lot of screen work or?
Well, I have only ever heard her do audiobooks. Uh-huh. She may do other things, but I have literally listened to books. Uh-huh. Because she was the narrator.
Hey, that means she has some influence.
I'm a big fan.
Does she gravitate towards a certain style of literature?
Not necessarily. She's kind of all over the place. It's been interesting to, listen to different things because of her.
Okay.
There's
So Bonnie Turpin is hot in the
she is for me.
In the narrating
she is
space.
For me. She narrated, and I don't know that this was the first one, but Children of Blood and Bone, which has been pretty popular. She was the narrator of that. And what is it called? The Southern the Southern Lady's Guide to Killing Vampires.
So it's another.
So it's kind of a wide array of different things. But
well, I did not know that about you in terms of science fiction,
yeah,
fandom, and more on the literature side. So you're not necessarily big on any of the movies that they've adapted into, or
So
does that do you kind of more so get more content out of the text?
Towards the books.
Okay.
The books first, and then sometimes I enjoy the films or the television shows. Mm-hmm. I tend to be drawn towards things that my husband says either whatever I'm watching, either someone dies or people have powers. Like those are like the two themes.
Usually they go hand in hand.
Yes, or both.
Or somebody has to die to get the powers.
Exactly.
You know. So what did you think about Lovecraft Country?
Oh, Lovecraft Country was so good.
That was like science fiction meets social,
really, like horror.
Yeah, it had horror elements. It was
because H.P. Lovecraft was like a horrible racist.
Yeah, that's what I've come to learn. I mean, the fact that particular piece of work had, whether it's the TV show adaptation or the text, it had elements of societal realism and science fiction and horror, suspense, and then going into the television show, it was a period piece. I thought that was like such amalgamation of different elements. I'd never seen anything like that.
It was probably one of the best things that's ever been on television.
Yeah, and
they didn't.
And they never knew it. But it's always kind of like
which is infuriating.
Yeah, it's crazy because it was so. The first episode had everybody like. I think the first 30 minutes, I'm like, okay, this is kind of like a period piece show. All you're gonna get is a more realistic take, and then something jumps out the ground. It's like supernatural. And something jumps out the ground that's alien, and then things, and it was all over the place, yet so succinct and good by the time it was over.
I was in it with that show. I was so in it with that show. I was watching it. I was listening to the podcast, the companion podcast to the show, and I, in addition. In terms of when I said I wear a lot of hats, I am one of the co-founders of something called Black Women Work, which is a community for Black women to really connect with each other. And we hosted a conversation. Oh, about yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit more about Black Women Work.
So Black Women Work it started as a Facebook group.
Uh-huh.
And the idea behind it was that, here in Northeast Ohio, there are lots of women's groups. And one of the things that we were watching was like every time something related to race would show up in the women's group, everything would just go to heck in a handbasket.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like, frankly, in large part, many, not all, of course, but many of the white women in those groups were very prepared to talk about sexism and how it impacts women,
right? And
not so prepared to dig into the intersections of race and gender. And so when something came up about racism or just the way that Black women sometimes, or just more broadly women of color's experiences in work settings and other things around bias is multi-layered, right? Because we're not just navigating sexism,
right? Yeah,
we're having to navigate
a lot of different battles,
racism as well, and in some cases even other kinds of isms. And so it felt like, wow, we need our own space,
right?
And so we created this group, but it's evolved. So after a time, I think one of the first things we did was something called Books and Bourbon. So it's a book club.
A fun combination.
And yes, and it involves cocktails.
There you go.
Cocktails and books. Can't go wrong there.
Right.
We also fund a small grant for Black women entrepreneurs. So on a quarterly basis, we give $1,000 to a Black woman entrepreneur who's doing amazing things
Nice.
in Northeast Ohio. And most recently, we launched something called 10 Dope Black Women. And so there was a nomination process. We recently selected those 10 dope Black women. And in the spring, there's going to be a brunch to celebrate
10 dope Black women in business or in community or
across. We were intentionally broad, and we really, one of the things we really wanted was, it's not in corporate spaces and even in more broadly nonprofit spaces, those women are often recognized. We wanted it to be a good mix of, even potentially women like first responders or in the service industry, as well as nonprofit and corporate and education and all of those spaces. So it is intentionally broad. Anybody who does anything,
I like that,
and they're contributing to their community and making a difference, could be one of the dope Black women.
So they can just get a groundswell of like people reaching out saying this is a dope.
Yeah, so someone has to nominate you. This is something that's we're gonna do this once a year, and yeah, so next year I hope it's something that people look out for and that they either nominate themselves or some other dope Black woman that they know.
So between this group and your main driving goal with Equius Group, where did the passion to elevate and promote change and equity and standing up and speaking out and maintaining that respect presence, where did that come from in Erica Merritt?
I have thought a lot about this, and I feel like my answer changes, but one of the things that I've gotten in touch with, I've kind of always been this person since I was a kid. So I was the kid in middle school who was, trying to convince my parents that they should not be going to the gas stations that had not divested from South Africa because of apartheid. And
it's a good time though. So I mean, not to cut. This is your story, but just gauging the time that you were coming of age, it was almost a cool, conscious movement at that point.
It was an interesting time, right? So I'm about to have a big birthday coming up that begins with a 5, and when I think about the years during which I was growing up, and you think about like what kind of music were we listening to and things like that. So I grew up like listening to KRS-One and Poor Righteous Teachers and rock, like artists in large part that there was a message in hip hop for us about who we could be, about injustice, about justice. And I think those things really shaped me, as did the fact. So my dad was very involved in his union. He worked for General Motors, and that was his activism, was workers' rights. Right. And that definitely had an influence on me.
You got it honest, almost.
I did. And he, early on, like even just as a little kid, I have memories of us being pulled over by the police for no obvious reason other than my dad was driving what would have been perceived as a nice car, and him just instilling in me that things will not always be fair. And one of the things that he used to do actually was, if he saw that the police had pulled somebody over, it wasn't unusual for him to pull over and watch them.
So that's a Panther tactic. Almost.
He would
watch the police.
He would absolutely watch them.
That's, that is saying something. That is because quite often in our communities, I would say, because we're not a monolith, but in a lot of our communities that we exist, encounters with the police are to be avoided.
Yeah, of course.
And even bystanding, you almost sense that you could be implicated or pulled into it and things of that nature. And it takes a certain select brave amount of people to say no. I'm going to sit and
Yeah,
and
my
watch
dad was like, and
yeah.
and was bold about like
Right.
he and it's interesting the anxiety that and the fear and the I mean we know all too many stories of
Right.
black men and boys and girls and women being killed by the police, but I didn't have that context yet.
Right. So, yeah, but that's healthy though.
Yeah,
It's healthy to know that there's a mistreatment, but not know
I didn't know the depth
full
of it.
the full depth
I
of it,
didn't.
because then you can grow in your outspokenness and grow in your self defense before letting something scare and stunt that growth.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and I had heard of, for example, like by the time I got to college, I heard of Amadou Diallo and what happened to him, and what the Rodney King beating was my sophomore year in college.
Oh, see, and that was like a big.
That was huge. That was actually that was one of the first. It was not even one of the. It was the first active protest that I was ever a part of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sparked outrage across the country, and then it sparked riots, of course, in LA and things of that nature when the verdict came down, and I think that all attributes to media being able to expose, because so in my early 20s was the big spread of smartphones and the fact that now you could see it, and now it's like, can you really ignore things now that it's being so projected, so.
Well, and just the reality that even then, the fact that it was on video was not enough.
Right. The injustices continue.
Yeah.
They just kind of blindly ignore, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So I mean, that probably goes hand in hand with your work with Equius Group and why you do what you do.
Yeah, so our work is, focused much more internally in terms of work inside of organizations, and I think about what's the connection, right, between these things we've been talking about. And so when we think about what's happening outside of institutions, what does that look like inside, right? What does that look like inside of organizations? And we saw in 2020 many organizations have what I'll call like an epiphany, right, around the murder of George Floyd. I cannot call it a reckoning.
That was the term that they use a lot.
It was, yeah. There's a great Code Switch episode called "The Racial Reckoning" that wasn't. And essentially, if I had to sum it up into a few words, the Code Switch team is like, yes, people read books.
Right. And they're like, it's our turn to listen. That was a big takeaway. A lot of people who included themselves in that racial reckoning is like, I haven't been listening. I think that's a healthy takeaway, is to listen, but to use the term reckoning is to almost say that like a real resolution was.
Right, and there has been no resolution. In fact, there has been plenty of backlash. But I think the connection is, so that we're talking, in this case, police brutality, and the harm to black bodies often at the hands of white officers, but not only, right? And we're like living in the midst of what's happening in Memphis, so we know it's not only white officers with black people. It's more complex than that, but that goes to the system as a whole and the reality of what happens to people when you are a part of it. So the translation, I think, between the external and the internal is like, what does psychological violence look like inside of an organization? What is happening to the people, right, inside? And yes, absolutely, the black people and the people of color, but also, frankly, what's happening to any group of people that has been marginalized, because whatever that experience is out in the world, it is often mirrored inside of organizations. And so what does that look like inside of the organization? And frankly, in this moment where this is such a fascinating moment in terms of the workplace, because in some cases, workers have not been treated well. Just in the way that we treat human beings around work.
Very true.
Period.
Very true.
Any human. Just humans and work, and like what is expected of human beings inside of an organization. And I think we're in a really fascinating moment where there are all kinds of challenges happening. I think some of that is generational, where Gen Z is like not here for like I can't get this, the whole like idea of like what's your dream job, and they're like, yeah, we don't dream of labor.
Yeah,
right. Like that, and like entirely different mindset in terms of
I don't know if I heard that particular response. I just know that they're like turned off by a lot of the structural, a lot of the constructs that have gone on for like the last century. They're like, I'm not with that.
Well, it's interesting because there's this kind of friction, I think, between people who have been in the workforce for a long time and what this idea of paying your dues, or this is the way it's always been, and this generation. And frankly, it's not only generational, right? I think COVID was really, a collective wake-up call. People, I think, for everyone to say, what are we doing?
Absolutely.
Right? Is this working?
What do you think? So, in being the Gen Z, if we were both to play Gen Z advocate, I think that it's important that they do have this stance, but do you think they have the answer to how does an economy work if we don't apply ourselves in different positions?
I don't necessarily think it's about not applying oneself, or about, even though the messaging is like people don't want to work. No, people are saying, I don't want to work the way you have worked. Right? And the way that you have worked and the way that you have thought about work is not working for us now. And so I think organizations are wrestling to try to figure out what that balance is. Right. Like, what is it that's going to work for the organization so that it can fully function? And if it's a nonprofit, or even if it's a for-profit, to fulfill its mission, like, why does it exist? And how does it go forward given the current context? And people are trying to figure out, okay, here's what these organizations are wanting from me. Is that lining up with what I want for myself? And I think one of the things, and so to just bring it back to Equius, so one of the things you will never hear me say is Equius is a family. You will never hear me say that. And it is not because I could tell you, I love the people I work with.
Right.
Like, I genuinely love the people I work with. And I care I care about them in the wholeness of, being human beings. But I think it's unfair of organizations to describe itself like your family is your family.
Right.
People have, and
so
there
you think
should be a separation.
So you think the employer or the organization doesn't have the right to say that, is what you're saying?
I don't think you have, because, and then we start talking about, this person's not loyal. They should be more loyal to their family than they are to an institution.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, why would they be more loyal to an organization than they are to their family? That doesn't even make any sense.
Because with family comes a higher level of accountability. That if an organization wants to just cut ties with you,
or if it has to, maybe it doesn't want to, but
if it has to, then it has to make that move.
Absolutely.
And family has stronger bond.
Yes. Hopefully lifelong. Absolutely.
Yeah. That is very, very, profound for you to say, and it makes a lot of sense. So you just don't want to paint that picture
I
and
don't
mislead anybody? Is that why you don't say it, or you
No,
just?
I just don't want to. I don't want to put that on people.
Right.
Right. I think, and I hope they would say the same. I think everyone who works with us knows. I would hate to see any one of them go.
Right.
I don't want them to go. I want them to stay. I want them to stay forever.
Right.
However, they are going to have to make the decisions that are right for them at any given time. And that may or may not line up with what my hopes are in terms of their, long-term
Exactly. People
stay
they're on their own
with
journey,
us.
and
Yes.
if that means that they're having a long period of time along with you, then that's it. But if not, you do have to.
Then I can, be grateful for the contribution that they have made to the organization thus far.
Right. I mean, Equius Group, I feel like my question to you, but I think I've gotten the answer just knowing about growing up and what you saw and how you were influenced. You mentioned your dad, but the question would still be, why the workplace and not any other area where the inequalities are happening?
So in terms of historically, maybe less so since the pandemic, but I think in terms of like how I've spent my like community time, some of that is absolutely in community, has been external. Where do we spend more time? Then in terms of our waking hours, there is no place that we spend all of our time, or so much of it, in organizations. And because a great many of our clients are nonprofit institutions and educational institutions, the work they're doing out in the world is important. And so really helping both the organization in terms of its structure and supporting the people to be able to be their best selves at work so that they can do the important work they're trying to do out in the world and make it better. Going back to what we were talking about in the first place, there is a great deal of need in the world. And I can even connect this back to our conversation around science fiction, because part of what inspires me about science fiction is the possibility. And I think the being able to imagine how organizations or our country, or even just our little slice here in Cleveland, could be different, and like being able to vividly see what is possible is a huge part of our work.
You must have been peeking at my questions that I had loaded because because that's a great tie-in. Science fiction does kind of go there before we get there in a lot of ways, or explore where we haven't yet explored. But a big question, one of the final questions is, what is in your mind, in your mindset, or in your just what is the ideal workplace to you? Workplace environment, I should say. And I mean, it could be as broad or as detailed as you.
Yeah. So for me, I think one, it is a place, whatever the mission of that organization is, that is happening, right? The organization is able to fulfill, and whether, if it's a for-profit, then it's producing whatever it is that they are putting out into the world. If it's a nonprofit, then it is, serving whoever it is that they exist to serve or provide services to. And it's also attending to the people that make that happen. And so for me, when I think about ideal workplace, I think about a place where people can go and really feel like they can show up authentically, and that their identity is not a barrier to their success in that environment. And they're able to lean into their strengths and utilize their talent in ways that are fulfilling to them. And that there is some sort of, I know work-life balance sometimes, I think I like work-life integration more than, because I think, things are always a little out of whack sometimes. So sometimes your personal life is demanding more of you than work, and then vice versa. Right. But to really think about, having it work in a way that works for you, at least most of the time, right? Yeah. None of us get to do what we want to do all the time, but having it, and also being in an environment where, because one of the other things that makes a huge difference, people leave assuming that all things are equal, that they feel good about their benefits, they feel good about the money that they're making, they feel good about the contribution they're putting onto the world. It's the people. Yeah. So part of it is also feeling like you are connected to at least some of the people that you work with closely every day, and that the people who are, or the person who's managing you, and the people that are leading the organization really have your best interest at heart and are pouring into you in a way that is allowing you to utilize your talent.
So I guess a healthy work environment, that's just the more generalized description that you're saying, but it has been hard to attain based on other, dichotomies where, like, really pull us apart, make us feel different, and then create this, every type of person comes to work.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And the work culture has to be inviting to them all in order to be an optimal, or
most of them.
Most of them.
One of the things we talk about
positive.
Is,
I say, well,
exactly, because I was gonna say one of the things we talk about is, you should ensure that the people that you are bringing into your organization are in alignment with the values that you say that you hold.
Right.
And if they are not,
then they aren't conducive anyway.
Right.
So you want to work with the positive people, and then there's variations of positive people.
Yeah,
but so long as they're all on track. So the philosophy that you carry with what you're doing is very high level and very thought out and very, very much understood. I've always thought that about Equius Group. Like, we got to have a whole other conversation about work-life integration, because that's a great way to look at it. Like,
and we don't always do it great. Like,
I know, but even just,
we're working on it.
I think even just semantics is calling it an integration and not a balance. A balance almost seems like a feat, to kind of gain your balance and do both. Whereas integration seems like the better way to go.
Yeah, how do these things work?
Let's just mix these things in a little bit, like, and that's a phenomenal way to look at it.
Yeah, and also trying to make sure that I have watched organizations that exist in this space in some cases, like what they're putting out to the world sounds great, but if you were to pull back the curtain around how they're functioning and how they're treating people, it's not right.
Like the Ellen show.
And that's probably
that's like the biggest example.
Really
like
example,
Ellen's like happy times. When she comes down the
right, and people are like, this place is horrible.
And I'm not, I don't know the first or last thing about it. I just know publicly.
But
that's
publicly,
good.
that was what happened. So yes, I don't want one of my team like Jamar.
I'm dying.
Exactly. She's like, it's horrible. But so there are things like we're trying to do as a team, including whether it's like taking time off. We did a winter break, so we shut it down like mid-December.
I think that's highly considerate
and took it to
of
the
others.
beginning of the year, and it wasn't something that counted against anyone. Right. In terms of time, we're just like, you know what, we're closed, and we'll see you next year. I'm really just encouraging people to take time. Sometimes, in order to service our clients, it does mean sometimes we're working late. It does mean sometimes we're working on weekends. We want there to be much less of that, and we're working on having there be much less of that. But work hard.
Sometimes,
we're working hard, so we're trying to make room.
Sometimes you gotta earn your
play.
leisure, and sometimes you gotta know when you just need a break.
Well, and those breaks don't exist just. These are some of these things are lessons I am learning and things that I am, taking a harder look at that I have just kind of been going along like that's the way it is. Right. And one of them is this whole idea, often we talk about taking time off so we can come back and be more productive. That's not why you're taking time off.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You taking time off to take time off.
Yeah, you just taking time off. You just
just deserve it because you're human,
exactly.
not because you.
Sometimes you just need to decompress, and it's not. It's not necessarily recharge. It's just I need to go away and relax. And
hashtag nap ministry. Listening to Trisha Hersey has definitely been opening my mind.
I'm not familiar with you.
Okay, you definitely have to check out her work. She has a wonderful book called Rest is Resistance.
Rest is
Resistance. And it's really about Black people been working.
Right.
we are paid our dues, and she really digs into the harm that is just rooted in living in a capitalist society and the way that capitalism requires constant productivity out of people in a way that you feel guilty when you're not moving.
Right. Yeah.
Which is wild. Why?
This is true. I gotta have you back to talk more in depth into this because I want to continue on, but we kind of went over today, and I really appreciate you. I'm gonna save some questions for you. I really, really love the conversations and where they go, just based on what you do professionally and what you do as part of your, innermost, I don't want to call you an activist because it's so much more in depth than what your social activist might, feel embodies what they do. I think you're changing a lot of different structures and cultures at the same time, and I think there's another word for that. There's another title for that. Like you're a multicultural activist, like a multi-platform, multi-structural activist, because what you do is not only in favor of behavioral change and just human positivity, but then it also walks the line of correcting racial injustices and things of that nature. So it's definitely on another level. I appreciate you very much, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. This is Get Notice Podcast. So see you next time.
Bye, everyone.